Hi there, Devin Salmon here from TTCI, bringing a video about the NUCARS UI and some of the features and tools within it that may help you build and design your models a little bit faster. This video is going to be about the errors and warnings that we have built into the UI and how those might help you in your model building, and also how you can circumvent some of those built-in functions that we have for helping you keep from maybe assigning the wrong PWL or wrong characteristic for a connection where you didn't mean to define it that way. So I'm going to jump into the program right now and we'll get you started. Okay, so I have eHopper loaded up here, and what I'm going to do first is just show you how some of these errors and warnings indicate within the UI and what the difference between the two are. So the easiest one to see usually is up here in the system title. It's the most visible one to start with. NUCARS does not like it when you don't have a system title, and so as you can see, when I deleted that system title name, we got this red indicator right here, and it says that the value is required. So that red indicator actually tells us is that this is an error. We've tried to separate errors and warnings into two separate categories. Errors are going to be things where NUCARS is actually going to fail. We know that based on our experience and the programming that's within the NUCARS engine, that this will actually cause a failure for the program. And the warnings are things that we, based on our experience or based on some intuition, we think, hey, maybe this is something that you want to reconsider, or you want to be really, really sure that it's what you're intending to implement in the model that you're actually building. Okay, so I'm going to put this back here, and we'll see that that error goes away, and NUCARS is happy again. So let's go over here, and let's say we wanted to add a new connection. A lot of you have probably noticed this. We add a connection. This one's going to pop up at 0, 0 to start with. And you'll see we've got two red indicators here indicating an error within NUCARS. You also notice that we have a visual red dot within the UI. You only see these happening with connections. This is the only place where we give that visual cue within the 3D view of the UI that the connection is bad, because with a body, really, you don't have that same ability. It's got mass, or it's got something like that, or it's at least got a visual representation of something with mass. And an input body, those are pretty well defined, and it's hard to make errors with those. But with the connection, if they don't have certain characteristics or certain properties defined, you can actually get the error, and this is where we take advantage of the 3D view in order to display that to the user. So I'm doing this primarily for the demonstration purposes here. So you'll notice the degree of freedom is one of the errors. So if I put in a valid degree of freedom, I'm going to go ahead and get that indicator fixed. Okay, so still got the characteristic as a problem, but at least I know which direction I'm pointing in. And that's really the thing we look for within the connection. We don't know how to display it unless we know which direction it's actually pointing. So that's why we give it that red dot. Just for the sake of the demonstration, I'm just going to pick this tow rope, and now it's fully defined and I don't have those errors. If I add a connection again in here, put it in the same spot, but we'll do a different color at least so we can see it. So again, I've got my red dot. I am going to pick some valid degree of freedom. Okay, great. So I've got my disk. Still need to define a role characteristic. But what I want to take a second to touch on here is the messages panel. And these messages are going to give you the critical errors. I've been referring to these as errors, but it says critical here. And then you also have the warnings. Those are the things that, again, by experience, we say maybe you want to rethink this, or you want to be very sure that you're doing exactly what you think you're doing. Within this panel, we try to give some kind of information regarding both the connection itself, the the type of warning, the severity, the name that's identifying that connection. We're giving you a message to try to help you identify and troubleshoot the error or the warning and why we're flagging it. The type, again, connections, simulation errors, things like that. And then what's the more specific property that we're throwing the error up against. And these classic error codes, we're slowly filling those in, just like we are with all warnings and errors. We're filling these in as we go through the development. So you'll see those populating as future releases come out. Okay. Just as a note, you do have the ability to filter on these. So if you only wanted to see your connection errors or your simulation errors, you can click here and each of those will filter appropriately. Okay. So I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to find this one. I'm just going to assign some role characteristic to it. So that's the errors that you can find within the UI fairly easily. The other one that I think is going to pop up pretty easily for folks is, especially if you're using older models or models that you've built in a sys file or text editor. What most people don't know, or maybe are familiar with and just know how to deal with, is that if you make a name longer than 15 characters, NUCARS, when it's outputting the output file, will actually truncate that name. So if you have duplicate names or names that are matching for the first 15 characters, it could easily become confusing if you're trying to output data for both of those. So we've put this nice little handy warning within the name that if it gets longer than 15 characters, it's not going to cause NUCARS to crash, but you do want to be aware of it, because as you output data, it may become confusing which channel you actually want to look at. Again, shows up in the message panel, and you can see the difference between the warning and the critical error that's down here. One last piece I want to touch on is something we implemented recently. So some of you may have noticed, if you've used the UI quite a bit, that we've tried to keep users from using PWLs in a way that could be confusing for them, and the definitions could be challenging in your model. So the PWLs now, we try to segregate them by both what we call the sense, which is either a translational or a rotational connection type, and also the PWL category. So that's either going to be a spring or a damper. And the reason this is important is because as we implemented the units feature within the UI, it became very important to know if we're talking about a force here or some kind of moment reaction. And also the distance, whether it's in inches or in radians. So I'm going to pop down here. Here's a perfect example. This is 13. This is PWL 13, ID number 15 within this simulation. And as you can see here, you've got a torque that has different units than these rotational distances. And now if I go to 14, ID number 16, you can see that there's actually a distance and a force up here. And the reason this becomes important is because as you were to translate from one unit system to another, the conversion factors, in particular for the Y values, the force in terms of torque and force, those have significantly different conversion factors. So in order to keep the user from potentially making mistakes and doing things that they don't want to do as they convert, what we've done is we've limited the PWLs that can be selected within the characteristic. Now, there are a lot of users that have a lot of experience and understand what they're doing within their model, and so limiting that could seem like a hindrance to them. Well, that's the last thing we want to do for an experienced user. We want you to be able to be creative and live within the bounds of the physics that NUCARS is going to output for you. And so if you go up here under simulation options, you have the option to enable this admin mode. What this admin mode does is it takes all that pre-filtering that we've built into this UI to help maybe less experienced users or just users who want to be a little bit more aware through the system giving them some feedback of the connections and characteristic matchup that they've done. This admin mode takes that filtering away. So let me go up here and find just any old characteristic here. So you can see here on PWL 14, I have in here. So if I click on this drop down without the admin mode, you can see the list is only limited to those that match up with that spring and that translational characteristic for this character. I'm sorry, those translational and stiffness elements properties that match up for this characteristic. But if I come over here and I flip on this admin mode, you'll notice the list gets much longer. So it took off all that filtering that we were trying to help the user with as they were going through building their model. So with those couple things, I'll leave you to experiment, and feel free to give us feedback about how this is implemented and what things you'd like to see in the future for NUCARS. And I hope you continue to find value in these videos. Thank you.